Say it again.
Test. Adam, how does this sound?
Sounds good. You sound
you hear
good.
me?
I can. Thank you, Eugene. Yeah, I've been to two press screenings for the New York Film Festival, which takes place, at least at this point, well before the festival begins, right? The P&I screenings.
It's interesting because, yes, the screenings start 2 weeks prior, but as far as I'm concerned, the first day of press screenings is the first day of the festival,
Yeah.
which makes it a really long, an even longer
Gestation.
festival. But it's fine.
Yeah.
So the festival's begun.
Shall I improperly use the word gestation? It has a very long gestation.
It's just a very long experience in a good way.
Yeah. So I'm going to also say, pardon if I have a little bit of a little cough thing going on, a little itchy throat.
I've got water
So,
here for you.
Thank you.
Fresh Film Society water.
It's like from the pure mountain stream of the Film Society.
There's
like
a Lincoln Center stream.
Well, there is a pool across in the campus.
Yeah, we're not using that water.
Well, speaking of which, this is not in the festival, so I don't know why I would bring it up, but I did see the new Michael Moore the other day.
Yeah, and we had it here. Did you see it here the other night?
No, I was invited.
Yeah.
So thanks for that. I know you personally invited me.
I did.
And then I screwed it up, and I actually showed up. I was on the Upper West Side already, but I was at something, and I said, I got to go. I got to make the premiere. I want to go, and then, and it was the next night. I just misread. It happens, but
It's a
was
film
so
actually.
frustrated, and I couldn't go.
Actually, a film we were tracking for the festival, and Michael has
yeah.
a history with the festival, and we would have loved to have it at the festival. And there was a moment earlier in the summer where Kent was talking to Michael about the film, and the same thing happened with Reversing Row, actually, Annie and Ricky's film.
Oh, is that their new film?
And so there's just a couple films, and it happens every year where there's films that are kind of on track to play at the festival, and then business happens and takes them in another direction. So
Yeah.
in the case of Michael's film and in the case of Reversing Row, both were films that we would have loved to have in the festival, but we ended up doing something with them before because we needed to accommodate their release dates.
Makes sense. And, as a postscript, Kent did talk to Michael at the Alice Tully Hall for that premiere.
Yeah, it was a
So
great
I
conversation.
really did want to make it, but I couldn't. Anyway, but I did see so far 2 screenings, even though the plan was to see far more than that already, because it's day 3.
This is day 3.
But I did see American Dharma yesterday.
Yeah.
Errol Morris, his new documentary about Steve Bannon. That was really a pleasure. And then I saw. I have to remember what I went into. Oh, Alex's film, Alex Ross Perry's
Yeah, that
new
was
film,
our first
First
press
Smell.
screening.
Yeah, right. I was there. So, and I really wanted to go see yesterday. I've been dying to see The Other Side of the Wind. I know it's going to be crazy. I have a lot of anticipation of what it's going to be like. I don't think I'll be disappointed because I kind of can, from all the sort of information I've been tapping into.
If you're interested and up for it and your schedule allows, see it on the second day of the festival, the second full day of the festival.
Well,
I think it's playing Saturday the 29th, and it'll be an amazing screening in Alice Tully Hall. So just come see it then.
I will. Yeah. It's going to have 2, like most things. It's going to have 2 screenings throughout the festival.
Mm-hmm. I'm looking at my calendar to make sure I don't give any wrong information, but it's playing at 2:15 on the 29th.
Okay. Very good. Nice prologuing there. But let's talk about you a little bit. I feel bad. This is your first. It's taken this long just to have you on this podcast for as long as we've known each other.
You've had a good run of my colleagues on the podcast over the years. So
it's true, but
I have no problem.
How many
waiting
years
my
now
turn.
have you been here?
This will be 8 years.
Really?
I know. I just saw the look on your face. That's how I feel too. 8 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
I thought you were the kid.
More
The new
than
kid.
half of the time that I was at IndieWire, I've now been at the Film Society, which is it's crazy to me too. 8 years.
Yeah. It's really something. Well, you brought up IndieWire. What's your relationship to that newsletter?
That little newsletter,
Yeah.
newsletter that no one reads anymore. No, they're doing great.
Yeah, I know.
I'm one of the founders of IndieWire, and I still have some really close friends who work there, and I talk to them all the time, and they ask me questions or for guidance ever so frequently, every so often, I should say, not that often. But no, I mean, I'm happy to as one of the proud parents of IndieWire, I'm thrilled to just be supportive and encouraging. And the publication has grown and expanded so dramatically since we first met when we were a much smaller effort, a much smaller entity. But, we'd sold the company to Steve Case and Ted Leonsis in 2008. And then a couple of years ago, it was sold again to Jay Penske. It's another part of the Penske Media family, right alongside Variety and Deadline. And it's so fascinating because when we started IndieWire in the mid-'90s, we really modeled ourselves after sort of... I always used to say it was kind of a hybrid, a mix between Variety and Filmmaker Magazine. Was sort of that's where we were trying to hit, somewhere in between there. And I never, absolutely ever, Mark Rabinowitz, one of the co-founders, and I could have never predicted or imagined that that someday in the future, this publication that we created, which was a small newsletter, a small email newsletter at the beginning, would be a sister publication to Variety. I mean, it's just... It was unthinkable at the time, but now, I mean, they're doing great. James Israel, who I worked with, Brian Brooks and I worked with for a long time at IndieWire, is the publisher, and he's been there ever since. And they're doing great. They've expanded their editorial. They're doing television. I mean, it's a much bigger publication, and they're doing really well within PMC. Tremendously successful.
Right. No. Yeah. And I just wonder, like, who you thought your readers were when you started it. What was the audience? What was the audience then? Like you're talking about now, obviously, I'm going to just do some math. It sounds like it's about, well, you had your 20th anniversary not too long ago, so it's got to be in the early to mid 20 years back that you founded it.
So we started, and it was, when I say we, it was myself, Mark Rabinowitz, and Sherry Barner. The intended audience at the time, and this was 1995, when we had a company called Eyeline. It's a company that we'd had together, and then we started IndieWire the next year. The intended audience was filmmakers and industry, first and foremost. We started with those two components, and when I say started, we really just began writing content and sending it out via email.
Right.
There was no organized or really structured business plan, although we worked with some really great business people. Carol Martesco, who was the founder and publisher of Filmmaker Magazine, got involved very early on. Brian Clark, who was the head of GMD Studios, got involved very early on and helped us kind of establish kind of a business structure, just to sort of do the day-to-day work, build a website, promote. We never had a budget for marketing, but to promote within festivals and really make connections. The initial concept was actually to be more of a, although we didn't know it at the time, kind of a social network for independent filmmakers and people who worked in independent film. So that was the audience. It was folks we met at film festivals, and this notion that you would go to film festivals, you go to Sundance or a couple other festivals, and you'd see folks there, and then you wouldn't see them till either the next festival, the LA Film Festival, or South by Southwest, Toronto. But there was no real way to kind of stay connected after the festival ended. So you'd go and have these amazing experiences at a festival every night, hanging out, seeing movies, going to parties, and then it ended.
Yeah, it's interesting because, and we should also remind people this was before social media, at least those first years, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I mean, the fact that there is social media was no doubt played some component in its expansion, but
no doubt. I mean, I think that the original, the original concept was really a social network before we knew what a social network was, and what I mean by that is we imagined, when we were conceiving of this thing called Eyeline and eventually IndieWire, we imagined this network of almost like we called them bureaus or hubs in different parts of the country: Los Angeles, New York, Austin, Seattle, Miami, all Chicago, anywhere around the country where there was a
film community,
an art house community, an independent filmmaking community. Sure, there was a concentration in New York, and there was some stuff happening in LA, but there was always amazing stuff. I say always, I'm meaning like from the late '80s to now. There's always been a strong community of filmmaking happening in Austin or in Seattle or, so many parts of the country. So the idea was to create a way that these filmmakers and people who work in film in different parts of the country could connect with each other. We didn't have the tools we had the ideas, but we didn't have the tools for creating that. And obviously Facebook does that really well and has done that very well. But before that, MySpace, and before that, Friendster. So when we were creating IndieWire and iLine, we relied on AOL as kind of the platform in which we would connect with folks. I remember one, I think it was like Memorial Day weekend of '95. I spent the entire weekend in my apartment here in New York searching on America Online for anyone who had independent film or indie film in their profile. You could create profiles on AOL.
Right.
And trying to gather as many email addresses, AOL addresses, as I could. And I think I ended up with like 250 or so. And later that summer in July, when we sent out our very first issue of IndieWire on email, I just emailed it to those 250 people who I knew were interested in independent film or indie film, and introduced this idea to them and said, hey, we're starting this thing. It's a way to connect with each other. We go to festivals, we write coverage, we track the news of independent film. And at this moment in the mid-90s, Variety would write a couple of articles about Sundance at the end of the festival. Filmmaker would write a festival dispatch after the festival had ended, but it was in print, so it would be like a couple months later, a couple issues later, and they were quarterly, and they're a great magazine. Our notion was that there would be an opportunity to create content every single day.
More real time, in other words. Yeah.
Of course, the downside of that, we realized by day 2, was that it's every single day. And it was an ambitious effort, but I think it worked. And I remember having this conversation with Mark Rabinowitz about the fact that we had created this daily, and there was a couple of other folks that helped us, and we were sort of daunted by the notion that we were going to have to do this. We were going to have to do this every day.
Right.
But there was a guy named Roberto Casada Darden who created an email newsletter called Indie. And it was like a newsletter that he had created around the same time, and he was kind of folding that, and we brought him on to help us kind of energize this. And by day 2 or 3, it started getting forwarded around, started collecting email addresses, and we realized that we were onto something. But the intended audience, to go back long-windedly back to your original question, was really just it was conceived to be focused on independent filmmakers and people who work in independent film.
Same audience. I think I've been kind of tapping into all the
Absolutely.
Yeah. I had no idea either, by the way. I realized it doing it, like, oh, this is my audience. Why am I thinking it's going to be anyone else? It's some film lovers, but it's by and large, I know my audience is primarily industry people and filmmakers.
Well, I think
which is great.
I think that what social networks allow us, and social media allows more broadly now, is the ability to actually be precise and specific about the kind of content we create. We do that here at the Film Society. It's what you do with your podcast. What we've been doing what we were doing when I was at IndieWire. But now, Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and other social platforms allow us to find those networks of people wherever they may be.
Right.
And sure, IndieWire is reaching a broader audience of even wider audience of film fans, and that's kind of the other component of coverage that was added when we were there as well, when I was there. But for content or programming that's created for a more specific audience, we can rely on these social networks and social media to directly find that audience, which was a lot harder. I mean, you go on AOL and search people's profiles, but there's a little bit more of a robust way to do that now.
Oh yes. So you were brought on to the Film Society in around 2010. What was the function? Was it since you're coming from a kind of a media background at this point, and what was the initial role that you were meant to play?
A woman by the name of Rose Kuo, who I met on the film festival circuit. Right. She was running AFI Fest for a while and working with a number of film festivals, and she became the executive director here at the Film Society. And she reached out to me she came on in the summer of 2010, and she reached out to me. We were friends from the festival circuit, and she said she wanted to give me a tour, and put on my hard hat, went across the street from where we are
to the
now
Film Center,
to what would become the Film Center on 65th between Broadway and Amsterdam, and the Eleanor Bunin Monroe Film Center hadn't opened yet. It was a year ahead of opening, and we walked through the space. And she just showed it off, and it was really impressive. And at that conversation, she said, "I would love to have you come work at the Film Society and create and lead our digital efforts." This organization, for much of its life, was a rather analog one. I'll tell you in a moment an example of how analog when we talk about the New York Film Festival. But it's a great example of how much has evolved at this organization. But the organization was relatively analog, had a terrific start of a social media presence. A woman by the name of Amanda McCormick had done some amazing work here with very little resources, and really a really persistent and smart approach, and had kind of laid the foundation and started the building blocks of what would be a much bigger effort in later years. But Rose asked me to come in and try to accelerate the organization's growth on the digital side. In walking around the space, I was actually more intrigued and turned on by the analog side. The fact that the organization was about to open a brand new film center, a $38 million film center with 2 new movie theaters, a small amphitheater, a restaurant and cafe. But I knew that space, the physical space, and I felt strongly that the physical space could actually not only connect to hopefully a new and bigger audience for the organization, but also in parallel with an emphasis and an investment on the digital side, could really lay the foundation for the organization's next chapter, really. And that was in July that we first spoke, and I didn't leave IndieWire until November. It took me a few months to I wasn't looking for a job, so it took me a few months to figure out. It didn't take me long to figure out that I wanted to do this. It took me a while to figure out how to do it and whether it was the right time to take off from IndieWire. And
did you have a sense that IndieWire was on a trajectory that as well at that time?
I felt that IndieWire was absolutely poised for an important next chapter for itself. My question to myself and to my colleagues at the time was whether I should be a part of that, or whether it was time to pass the baton. And I struggled with that notion because, again, I wasn't looking for a job, but the opportunity came, and the Film Society is very meaningful to me, and always has been as long as I've been in New York. It was the first place I discovered, the first cultural institution, the first real film place, film home that I discovered when I moved to New York. And I lived nearby, and I worked when I moved to New York. I worked across the street at ABC Television. So when I started coming here in the early 90s, it just became an immediate home for me. And so if I ever were to leave IndieWire, this would have been the place that I would want to go. Probably this, or like Sundance, which has given me a lot personally as well, and gave a lot to IndieWire. But as I thought about it further and talked with colleagues and family and friends, I realized that I felt that the true mark of success and ultimately of pride, I think, in IndieWire would be the ability to pass on the baton, and also that it would continue without me or without the founders. I think that's the sign of longevity, when you can step aside, pass the baton, and it can continue to grow. And I think IndieWire was ready for a next chapter, and it was a great moment to bring someone for me to go in a different direction, and also to bring someone else into the mix. And I think Dana Harris, as the editor-in-chief and general manager, and James as the publisher, James Israel, who I mentioned earlier, it's just been in the right hands. Ann Thompson, who I had brought in as a blogger when I was there, coming in as editor-at-large. I mean, it's such a strong team, and it was like the right group to kind of take it to the next level.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so now you're here.
Yeah, yeah.
So you mentioned the analog component that you were kind of was appealing. You made a reference before, but also, so what was the idea that what was the digital realm that you were going to instill or anyway bring to the Film Society? I mean, was it part of the actual films? Was it part of the online presence? Was it all the above? Film comment?
It was a little bit of everything, and when
which was a physical magazine.
Yeah, I mean, when I sat down with the organization, I met with the board president Dan Stern and a number of people involved with the organization, other board members. I found that when I met with folks here, I found that there was not only an appetite for exploring and embracing digital opportunities for the organization, there was an urgency. The organization was a year away from opening the Film Center. It was an opportunity to engage and connect with a new audience or a bigger audience here in New York. And so I looked at, and we as a group looked at, so many different areas of potential growth, some of which we're still exploring. But the initial areas that we started to explore were, of course, social media, building on what Amanda had laid the foundation with here at the Film Society, kind of scrapping and building a brand new website, not only for the organization but for Film Comment. The beginnings of a website for Film Comment. They had been doing some things online in some ways, but it was an opportunity to grow that as well. But also looking at everything the organization did digitally, from things on the back end, ticketing systems and Google Drive and Google Apps internally. It was looking at everything we do as an organization and exploring and really experimenting with how we could and how we might evolve an organization, from its back-end systems to its promotional platforms to the programming itself. I didn't know it at the time. I took the job, and it took a couple of years for us all here to learn that our chief projectionist, who was here for 20 plus years, Don Schul, passed away a few years ago, had been recording on various formats of media, virtually every conversation that's ever happened in the Walter Reed Theater on stage.
Gotcha. That's amazing.
So there's tapes,
people didn't know,
and hard drives, and I mean, I think it was something he did more as a hobby-ish.
It wasn't official, in other words.
It wasn't official, and it wasn't organized,
right? Other
than within his own process.
Sure.
So, but think about, and now we're expressing that collection of content in many different ways, but the idea of taking what we're doing here at the Film Society, the conversation we had 2 nights ago with Ricky and Annie talking about reversing Roe on stage with Kent Jones, and a panel of activists and lawyers talking about a really compelling film, a topic that's so related to what's going on in the world at this very moment. And our ability to record and capture that conversation and share it with a much bigger audience. It was a full house on Monday night watching this screening of a movie that was already on Netflix, actually. Went up on Netflix on Friday. But
wow.
we decided to show it on Monday. Packed.
Sure.
More than... the audience was full, 268 people in the theater. But thousands more will potentially be able to watch and listen to that conversation when they discover the film on Netflix. They can come to the Film Society's website or go to our YouTube channel or sign up for our podcast and listen to that conversation.
So you're posting these things now pretty much like immediately.
Yeah, and this is just one area that
sure, it's a great example.
When I came here, we talked about how we could express, how we could explore.
That whole archive, though, this incredible archive that Don was recording of all these Q&As, all those events, that's an enormous you're digitizing or converting and systemizing. Is that the word? Right? It's like this. There must be thousands or many hundreds of them.
It's still a work in progress.
Sure, I'm sure it is.
So the one thing that I learned, I always thought about this organization, and I mentioned I started coming here when I think the Walter Reed was like 2 years old. I started coming here in 1993 when I moved to New York. 1994 when I moved to New York, 3 years old. I always thought of it as a place that you would go and watch a movie, listen to a conversation, and then it was gone. So you had to be there, and that's still part of it. That's still a big part of it.
Yeah.
But the legacy that actually Don created and what we've continued now, what we've accelerated and expanded upon, is that sure, this is an organization where you can experience on any given night a screening with a conversation. You can hang out with your friends after and have a glass of wine or some food at the cafe. It's a place to connect in real life, IRL. But it's also a place that can create and share experiences and conversations and content and context with the world. And so we started recording more aggressively within the past 5 years or so. Almost basically every conversation that we do on stage here at Lincoln Center. And we started exploring and experimenting with how to share that content. So we started a podcast, and every week we put up a conversation from the Film Society, either from the present or from the past. When Mike Nichols passed away, we dove into that collection that we have, and we found on one of the tapes or hard drives buried deep in the projection booth a conversation that he and Elaine May had on the stage of the Walter Reed. And when Mike Nichols passed away, we digitized that and put it on our podcast. It was one of our most popular podcasts. When Paul Thomas Anderson came to the festival a few years ago and did an On Cinema conversation with Kent about the movies that inspire him in Alice Tully Hall, it sold out very, very quickly, 1,100 seats. We could have sold out that house multiple times over. But instead, we recorded it, captured it, and put it on it was the very first podcast that we did. And I think it's also still one of the most popular. And so now thousands of people have attended that New York Film Festival conversation with Kent and Paul Thomas Anderson.
So Pat,
that's the
people
idea.
Go to the YouTube channel, the Film Society YouTube channel, and to find this content you're talking about, or it's also embedded on the Film Society website. There's a page.
There's a great guy, and thank you for mentioning it. Yeah, there's a great guy here who maybe in a future incarnation or in a future edition of this podcast, you'll sit down with him.
Sure.
A guy named Jordan Raup, who Jordan himself is an entrepreneur. He started a website called The Film Stage. He works with us here at the Film Society as our head of digital content and marketing. When I started, I was director of digital strategy, and I've since become the deputy director of the organization. But Jordan, who joined us a couple years ago, leads all of our digital efforts now, and he's being super aggressive about capturing everything that we do, both on stage and off. We're doing our own podcasts and photo shoots and interviews and conversations. Film Comment has a podcast. When I started, we began to explore the same kind of archive that we have on the live conversation on the events. The same kind of archive exists for Film Comment. We have more than 50 years of magazines, print magazines, and editorial content, exploring every moment of cinema and cinema culture for the past 50 plus years, much of it in printed form. So we're embarking on a future version of the Film Society that really, for lack of a better word, exploits all of this content, shares it,
engages people with it, right?
And it would be it would be a shame.
Right.
It would be a tremendous loss for film culture not to do something with all these conversations that have been recorded, all of this editorial content from Film Comment, and next year the Film Society turns 50, and it's an opportunity for us to start talking about that.
Yeah, and think about it like what a kind of maybe it will inspire so many other film societies that are out there, to do the same if they're not already doing it.
We also see an opportunity to work with those many film societies and art houses around the country. There's an incredible network of art houses, and there's a terrific conference that happens. It's right before the Sundance Film Festival called the Art House Convergence.
Yeah,
and first year I started going, there were definitely fewer than 100, maybe even fewer than 75 people that attended this conference. It takes place at a mountain resort not too far from Park City, right before Sundance, the week before. This past year, there were hundreds, so many people that they've had to expand to the neighboring mountain resort just to accommodate everyone. It's a giant convention of people that do what we do here, the Film Society, but all over the country, at mom and pop owned movie theaters, single screen movie theaters, multiplexes, art houses, film societies, museums, and it's become the gathering place for these for this art house culture, and we also think that now there's the technologies in place that we could actually collaborate and share. I'm actually working on an event that right now that hopefully we'll be able to announce in the next couple weeks or month or so that might connect. The notion is to say originate something from here at Lincoln Center, but connect it with 7 or 8 dozen other art houses on the same night, maybe a shared program, or recording something here and sharing it with other art houses, or recording something somewhere else and taking it here. So that infrastructure actually exists in a technological way now, where there's this giant server in the cloud that already a lot of distributors and content creators are putting their trailers and other material, and then art houses can take it down and ingest it into their booth and screen it on a big screen.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That kind of thing has been done already a lot by, for example, the Metropolitan Opera. They're recording live operas,
Sure.
and
you can go to some theaters
all over the place
having screenings of those to
I think
reach audiences that they couldn't before.
Yeah, and I think there are a number of us who imagine a scenario in which art houses can have the same kind of content that's related to whether that's new films, old films, one-offs, conversations with filmmakers or others, and doing more of that in a kind of network and kind of a coalition.
Yeah, it's very exciting. I don't know if you're aware of this because it's the theater here at Lincoln Center, but as a side note, my son's mother is an actor. She's was in this play Pipeline last year. I don't know if you saw that. It was on the campus.
I didn't see it, but I remember seeing all of the
the
advertising. I heard very good things about it.
They filmed it like a little bit sort of between a theatrical film and a staged, the filming of a play. And they're actually doing a limited kind of theatrical thing around, well, it's not just around the country, but it's actually also in Europe too. Because it's the subject matter is very, very pertinent and very, of its moment. And so they went in and shot it, and it's going to have these screenings. And it's under the aegis of Lincoln Center Theater.
Yeah.
It's not.
Well, I think it's absolutely the direction that this organization is exploring, and so many other organizations like ours. Look, it's a in many ways it's a really fragile moment for culture generally, but for art house culture
especially
specifically.
Yeah.
It's difficult to do what we do. We're very fortunate here at Lincoln Center to be at Lincoln Center, the arguably one of the greatest arts campus, and it was the first of its kind when it was founded in the early 60s. This notion of bringing together all the different art forms into one centralized place was a bold idea that was also an experiment, and it meant bringing the opera from a different part of New York, bringing Juilliard from the Upper West Side, bringing all the different art forms that are represented on campus to this one central place, this one cultural hub. Now it's a very common thing. You see it in so many different cities around the world to have this kind of campus of arts institutions. But certainly in this country, when it happened here at Lincoln Center in the 60s, it was an experiment. It was a new idea.
Right.
And the arts are certainly challenged in this country and certainly at this moment. But in this country specifically, without proper funding from the government, we have to rely on individual philanthropists. We have to rely on ticket sales. We have to rely on corporate sponsors and other grants and gifts to sustain ourselves. And we're fortunate that we're at Lincoln Center, this great campus, this great arts campus. But it can be really challenging in a smaller city that doesn't have the resources or maybe doesn't have the tremendous access to individual philanthropists. It makes it challenging. So anything we can do as a coalition of cultural institutions to support and sustain the art form of film, especially at a time when there are so many different ways now to watch movies. Watching a movie on a big screen with an audience is not always the first choice for people to watch a movie. It's still, thankfully, among the top choices, the top ways that people watch movies. But a lot of my friends, certainly a lot of folks that are younger, watch movies in different ways on different size screens, not always in a big screen, on a big screen with an audience, with 100 people next to you.
Well, you might be on the subway, so watching it on your watch, and then you are standing next to or alongside hundreds of people. No, I understand.
That's true. Good point.
Sorry,
but
they're not watching it.
It's
though.
Interesting how cinema has become such an individual experience,
right,
or a more private experience.
Yeah, interesting. Right.
Or much smaller communities of people, a few people, a couple friends, a family, a couple, watching something, whether it's on Netflix or on iTunes or on Amazon.
Right.
And I find that a lot of people I know are actually more voracious. They're watching more content than they ever have.
Absolutely.
In more places.
Right.
Maybe they're going to the movie theater less frequently. But for us, we're still, as a nearly 50-year-old organization at the Film Society, our mission hasn't changed, and that's to support and embrace the art and craft of cinema, but also provide that context. And so when we can record a conversation between a filmmaker and one of our programmers and share that out with the world on some platform, we can still have that connection to an audience, even if they never watch a movie in our theater.
Right. I mean, here, even though I know you mentioned the Film Center, where there is on any week, there's usually there's good 2 theatricals that are going on a typical week, right? Because there's 2 theaters. However, by and large, one thing that the Film Society does on a regular basis is it eventizes many of the screenings here. Certainly, almost entirely at the Walter Reed because of the one-offs and or retros or things like that. So, which is a reason why people would come to the theater, because they can't, no matter what they put on, Filmstruck and Netflix or what have you, they can't really get the same kind of experience of being in the same room and then maybe having a conversation in the lobby afterwards, as you said, or on the way home.
I mean, to me, that's the beauty of the New York Film Festival.
Right.
And this is what I discovered when I moved to New York in the mid-90s, was exactly what you just said. I was seeing a lot of movies at that time on videotape or Laserdisc or whatever. But it wasn't the same as going to the movie theater, especially the ultimate eventizing experience for this organization is the New York Film Festival. It's 17 days long, and it's just, it's just nonstop. It's a marathon. And that to me is something unique and special and a terrific opportunity. We try to create during the festival or during one of the other dozen festivals we do or series we do, or first runs, as you mentioned, around the year, or one-off sneak previews and special events. We try to really think about that experience of that event that's more than just the movie. The movie is the center of the experience. We want to have the best projection, the best sound, the best experience for an audience. But what else can we do around that to facilitate not only an engagement with that artist or with a critic or a curator to talk about that art, but also to just facilitate and give people a chance to connect with each other, whether that's at a party, a reception, a pre-conversation, or casual drinks after in our cafe. To me, that's what enriches the whole experience.
Absolutely, for sure. And people that are listening and that are in the New York City area and love art house and independent film should definitely take the opportunity at this point to subscribe to the Film Society's email. Get on their newsletter email list, because all the information is going to be there. There's also there's a number of ways to be kept up to date about all things that are going on here throughout the year.
We really try to create as many different ways and try to be on as many different platforms so that audiences can connect with us in whatever way they feel appropriate.
And the Twitter feed.
You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, sign up for the various newsletters you mentioned, whether that's for the Film Society at filmlink.org or filmcomment.com. We have 2 different apps, one for the magazine and one for Film Society. We have 2 different podcasts. So, there's a bunch of different platforms and channels and ways in which we connect with an audience. When I started here, again, we were interested as an organization in exploring, but there was a more analog
culture
and
rooted
in approach,
right?
And in some ways, it was very hands-on and very much individual to individual. The best example I can give, because this is how I used to attend the festival. Today, when you attend the festival, you go online on the website and choose all your tickets, and you can be alerted to new tickets being put on sale immediately via Twitter. Whenever we put more tickets on sale, we're able to release tickets that were being held by some of our members, or studio may give back some tickets to be sold to the public that they aren't going to use, and we'll immediately do an alert on Twitter and say tickets are being released today for X, Y, and Z, or sometimes we'll even announce special programs or surprise programs on social media. And people can act very quickly, and they can be engaged with us throughout the day and throughout the festival. But when I started going to this festival, the way you attended was you took a blank check that you filled out everywhere except for the amount, and you took a piece of paper and you checked off the movies you wanted to buy tickets to, and you put all that in an envelope with your blank check, and you mailed it to the Film Society. And then a few weeks later, they would fill out the amount that you were being charged, and they would send you your tickets back.
Are you serious? I don't remember that.
That was how I bought tickets to the film festival. I mailed the Film Society of Lincoln Center a blank check.
It's incredible.
And things are very different now. But when I talk about this being an analog organization, that's how ticketing and package fulfillment and ticket sales for the festival happened for a very long time.
Do you still accept checks, personal checks? It was a seminal moment. I remember actually, and this has got to be in the early '90s. I believe still working in the music industry, perhaps, but is that I remember just deciding I'm going to buy. So I would every year the New York Times would have this big 2-page ad of all when they would announce all the films at the New York Film Festival, and I loved just pouring through it, and I always wanted to be somebody. I always would afford to just go to everything. And one year, I guess I was ahead of the game financially because I bought 2 blocks. I bought two pairs of tickets for everything for one of the blocks, I guess, and so I had tickets. I must have come here and picked up. I don't remember, but I assume I must have come here to the box office and just done it there. I don't remember how it happened anymore. But I took all my friends and my parents to screenings that year, and had the time of my life going to just. And I didn't know a lot of the filmmakers. I knew some of them, but I was introduced to so many people. I believe now that I'm thinking about it, this really probably played an instrumental role in my kind of getting really, gravitating towards what I'm doing, as I think back about it. Because I didn't really attend, I don't think, against it till Mark Rabinowitz, who you've mentioned. He sort of gave me an opportunity just to help blog for him because I was looking to kind of...
Remember, that's how I met you.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, he just texted me yesterday, I think, or the day before, saying he's coming out.
Yeah, he'll be here next week. He's going to be here for opening night. The Rabbi returns.
The Rabbi returns, so it'll hopefully be a bit of a reunion for you guys, certainly,
absolutely,
and myself. So I have my own connections, and that I found myself, by the way, this year. I don't know if you're familiar, but I was on the screening committee.
That's right. I did know that.
Thank you. So well, I watched 100 shorts, so I could get a film badge, which I already was able to get from being on the press.
Now you're even more of an insider. You can watch tons of movies, I hope. But I mean, I it's funny because I did the same thing early on. My first New York Film Festival was I didn't even know. Sure, the movie that I most remember as my first New York Film Festival experience, it was the very first movie I saw at the festival, was Pulp Fiction, the year that it opened the festival in 1994. Yeah. And that was, certainly high profile, memorable, it was a notable screening, a notable movie. But I also just took a chance on a bunch of other movies, and I didn't have a lot of money. I just moved to New York. I had a job at ABC Television. I was in my 20s. But I took a risk. I took a chance. I know, and we know here at the Film Society, how it can be expensive to sustain a movie addiction. So one of the things we've done in the last now 6 years since opening the Film Center is we do a number of free events. Attending a film festival should not...
break your wallet, break your bank account.
We have amazing donors and members and philanthropists who support this organization and have the resources to do so. But we want the festival to be accessible to as many different audiences as possible. So we do every night free events at the film festival, talks, panels, conversations. We'll release tickets. We hold back tickets and we'll release tickets on the day of for Rush for half price. So folks just need to sign up for our newsletter and all the different
Twitter
platforms.
feed, as you mentioned,
and we'll release information on that stuff. But that was also a big change for this organization to really, when we had the space to do so, to just start doing more things, start doing more events that are free and that are open to the public. We're doing we've had screenings off campus before, but we're doing our very first screening in Harlem with Barry Jenkins' new film, If Beale Street Could Talk, and the very first screening of that film will be at the Apollo, and it's going to be a great night with Barry, and having his film, the very first screening of his film at the New York Film Festival will actually be off campus and at the Apollo.
Is that a first? I don't remember that happening before.
We haven't ever done anything at during the festival that I know of at the Apollo. We did an event with the Apollo a few years ago. There was a documentary about Nina Simone that was on Netflix.
Oh, yeah. What Happened, Miss Simone?
What Happened, Miss Simone? Mm-hmm. And we did a premiere of that event of that film with Netflix up at the Apollo. And this year with Barry's film, and given the subject matter, and given that much of it was shot in Harlem, it was just such a perfect opportunity to take the movie and premiere it.
When's that, by the way?
It'll be on October 9th.
October 9th, okay. Well, since we're talking, as we wind down, because I know you probably have some things to do, or get to, do you want to just mention a few more things? You mentioned some free panels, and I've been to some of those, and they're, by the way, I mean, every bit as fun and interesting as the paid events. So, people really should look through those. And
we haven't even announced, but by the time this is on, by the time this podcast is up,
sometime in late October,
we'll have announced them. But looking on the wall behind you on the whiteboard,
oh wow,
my former IndieWire colleague Brian Brooks, who's probably sitting outside the door of this office waiting to come in and meet with me after we're done, is organizing the talks, and we've got a terrific selection of free talks that'll happen during the festival this year. Frederick Wiseman is doing a free talk on October 1st. The artist JR and
as the one who was in Faces, Places.
Yeah, and
Ed,
the cinematographer Ed Lockman,
who's a guest on the show.
have collaborated.
They've both been on the show, actually.
They've collaborated this year to create the film festival's poster, which hasn't been announced or revealed yet, but that's coming soon.
Morgan.
And they'll be doing a talk. Morgan Neville, the documentary filmmaker. We've also got panels, a documentary panel with a number of the doc filmmakers. We've got a panel we're doing with the Producers Guild, with the Writers Guild, with New York Women in Film and Television, a panel on costume design. Film Comment is doing 2 or 3 panels throughout the festival. So, these are just some of the free events that you'll see happening during the festival.
I won't mention those ones on the bottom there that says Under the Possibilities.
Yeah, some of those may or may not be happening. There's one there that we haven't even announced yet as well. So, for a movie we haven't announced yet. But it's for us, it's just having a bigger footprint at Lincoln Center, having the Walter Reed and everything on this side of the street, but then also the other theaters across the street, just gives us an opportunity to play even more, get the opportunity to do even more, and gives us a chance to share some of the movies and the people that are going to be in town for almost 3 weeks with the city, with New York.
We've talked so long. I'm not going to start asking you to talk about individual films. I mean, it's the best of world cinema, we could say. And you have a narrative films, a documentary, whole portion of the festival just on brand new documentaries by some of the best of the documentary community. Convergence, right? Which is
Convergence has really become one of the most exciting aspects of the festival, and this year we've got a full VR arcade, and that'll be it used to be the first weekend of the festival. This year it's the third weekend of the festival, and it's a whole weekend of VR and immersive storytelling. Really great stuff. On the second weekend we've got Projections, which is our more experimental and avant-garde film program. But much of the lineup really stretches the full span of the 17 days, whether that's the main slate, which is about 30 films this year, or the documentary program, or some of the special events you mentioned. I mean, my personal favorite movie, probably my favorite movie of the year, but I still have more to see as always, is a movie called Roma, which is directed by Alfonso Cuarón. He's going to do a conversation the day after the screening. The centerpiece screening is on October 5th, and he's going to do a conversation with Kent Jones on the 6th. It's one of the best movies I've seen in a really long time.
Great.
And even though it's a Netflix movie, even though so many people will see it on Netflix when it airs, I think it'll be great on Netflix. It'll be a special and memorable experience to see it on a big screen, and if
with Cuarón
with him there, and just the experience of the way he shot it. It's in black and white, but in widescreen format, with just an exceptional attention to the details of the sound alone. Seeing it on a big screen with an audience will be a memorable and kind of one-time only experience for this movie that will have a small theatrical life, but will reach audiences around the world once it's on Netflix. So it's going to be a great way to experience that movie, and it's a great movie.
Just because you mentioned it's the centerpiece.
Yes.
Well, let's talk just about opening night and closing night films as well.
Yeah. I mean, the opening night is a movie by Yorgos Lanthimos called The Favorite.
Right.
It's a twisted kind of tale of royal intrigue. It's also one of my favorite movies of the year. Maybe it's number 2. Because it's just wickedly funny. Olivia Colman is a revelation to me. I was familiar with her, but really this movie just... her role as the Queen is just stunning.
Wow.
Rachel Weisz, Emma Stone. It's dark and funny like any Yorgos Lanthimos movie, but it's also it's also accessible and really entertaining.
Great.
On closing night, Julian Schnabel is back at the festival with At Eternity's Gate, and I watched this movie, and it's Willem Dafoe playing Vincent Van Gogh. And
Van Gogh for some of my listeners.
I watched this movie, and I had to pause for a moment and remember whether Willem Dafoe had ever played Vincent Van Gogh, because it's such a great performance that you almost think you've seen it before. Like he embodies this character. He looks like
so
him.
familiar.
Yeah, it's so familiar, and he did such a great job. The two of them were collaborating. I remember when Willem was here, sometime in the past year, he was here with Florida Project after the festival, and he had said to me, he's like, "Oh yeah, I'm going away for the weekend to the south of France. I'm working on this movie with Julian Schnabel," and like I was intrigued. He's like, "Yeah, I've been flying out there every so often just to work with Julian. We're doing this movie about Vincent van Gogh." And he was very humble and didn't go into much detail, but they were just getting together in the south of France. It's beautifully shot in the south of France, in places where Van Gogh lived and worked. And they've just they immerse you in this world, his life, and his struggles near the end of his life. It's a beautiful movie, and I think it's going to play really well. It played in Venice, but I think it's going to play really well here.
Tickets are obviously available.
Tickets are on sale.
Go to New York Film Festival. Well, Google the New York Film Festival.
Filmlink.org
or filmlink.org.
NYFF. More tickets will be released before, during, and at the end of the festival. We actually will add, we haven't announced yet, we're adding a bunch of screenings of some of the most popular and films that have sold the best. We'll bring back
for
screenings.
an additional third screening,
yeah,
or
the
what
final 2 days of the festival
this
this year.
Oh, is that new too? Or is that
this year? Yeah, we're expanding it to 2 days.
Okay.
So the final Saturday and Sunday will all be repeat screenings of films from the festival.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
This was fantastic.
Thank you, Adam.
Okay.
Thanks for
I'll
coming.
see you in 8 years.
Okay.